The old Brahman bull collapsed in the grass, its massive ribcage creaking beneath the python's crushing embrace. Each labored breath grew shallower than the last, the once proud animal's eyes clouding with a final, desperate plea. Ranger Mike Thompson froze mid-stride, his weathered hand clutching the radio as the scene before him defied 45 years of wilderness protocol. It wasn't just any bull dying in the merciless coils, it was Thunderheart. "Jesus Christ, Mike, what are you doing?" Dylan's voice cracked through the radio as the younger ranger's truck skidded to a halt behind him, dust billowing like ghosts across the Texas preserve. Rebecca's clipboard clattered to the ground, her professional composure shattered by the grotesque tableau. The dying bull's eyes locked with Mike's, reflecting memories of Sarah's gentle hands and promises whispered under summer stars, promises a widower couldn't keep. "Call Jessica." "Now!" Mike commanded, already sprinting forward despite the protest of arthritic knees and retirement papers waiting on his desk. What force could drive a man to risk everything for a creature that should mean nothing? And how many rules would be broken before the day was through? Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments along with the city you're watching from now. Let's continue with the story. Mike Thompson's weathered hands gripped the steering wheel of his Ranger truck, knuckles white against sun-browned skin. At 65, his once broad shoulders now carried the invisible weight of approaching retirement, a burden heavier than any he'd shouldered in his 45 years of service to the Oak Ridge Wildlife Preserve. The Texas sun beat down through the windshield, highlighting the deep creases time had carved around his eyes, eyes that had witnessed the changing landscape of conservation from idealistic beginnings to today's data-driven management. 2 more days, he muttered to himself, glancing at the small photo of Sarah tucked into the dashboard. His late wife's smile remained unchanged, frozen 5 years ago before cancer took her. The picture was framed by the weathered leather of the truck's interior, a vehicle as much a part of him as his own heartbeat. 2 more days, and then what, old girl? The radio crackled to life. "Unit 3, this is headquarters. You're off your designated route again. Please confirm location." The voice belonged to Dylan Barrett, 35, tech-savvy and ambitious, everything Mike was not. Where Mike read animal tracks, Dylan read spreadsheets. Where Mike followed instinct, Dylan followed protocols. "Just checking the south water hole," Mike replied, deliberately vague. No need to tell Dylan he was following tracks that didn't match any authorized research project. Back at headquarters, Dylan Barrett frowned at the digital map display, adjusting his wireless earpiece with manicured fingers. His crisp Ranger uniform contrasted with Mike's faded one, the same way his approach to conservation contrasted with the older man's methods. To Dylan, Mike represented everything outdated about wildlife management, sentiment over science, instinct over data. "He's going rogue again," Dylan remarked to Rebecca Wilson, who sat at the adjacent desk, her dark hair pulled back in a professional bun, her eyes fixed on budget reports. Rebecca looked up briefly, her expression guarded. At 33, she walked a careful line between respecting Mike's experience and supporting her father Vernon's vision for the preserve. "It's his last patrol. Let him have it." "That's exactly when mistakes happen," Dylan replied, already drafting an email to Vernon. Their relationship had advanced beyond professional since Dylan began dating Rebecca 6 months ago, and Vernon had hinted at possibilities once Mike retired. The preserve needed younger leadership, Vernon had said. Leadership that understood modern conservation meant difficult choices. Meanwhile, across town in her modest veterinary clinic, Jessica Thompson, 38, hung up the phone with a sigh that seemed to deflate her entire body. Another call from the bank about her father's mortgage, another reminder that Mike's pension wouldn't cover the debt. She glanced at the Boston Veterinary Journal on her desk, featuring her former colleague's groundbreaking research. 2 years ago, she'd left that prestigious practice to help her father after finding him living on canned soup and pride. "Dr. Thompson, your 3 o'clock is here," her assistant called, pulling Jessica back to the present, to the small-town practice she'd never wanted, to the father who'd never understood her ambitions, to the dutiful daughter role she'd reluctantly embraced. What none of them knew yet was how a single aging Brahmin bull with a heart-shaped mark on its forehead would soon collide with their carefully constructed worlds, forcing each to confront what truly matters when principles, loyalty, and survival hang in the balance. Mike slowed the truck as he approached the dried creek bed, his experienced eyes catching what most would miss, the distinctive slide pattern of something large moving through the dusty terrain. Not cattle, not deer. Something that dragged its considerable weight across the earth. "Well, I'll be damned," he muttered, cutting the engine and reaching for his binoculars. The silence of the preserve enveloped him, broken only by the distant call of a red-tailed hawk circling overhead. Through the lenses, he traced the tracks to where they disappeared into a thicket of mesquite, python tracks, not native to this part of Texas. Probably someone's exotic pet released when it grew too large, an increasingly common problem that infuriated Mike to no end. The radio crackled to life, startling him from his observation. "Mike, you there?" The voice belonged to Earl Jennings, an old rancher whose property bordered the western edge of the preserve. They'd known each other 30 years, bonded by a shared reverence for the land that the younger generation seemed to lack. "Go ahead, Earl. That Brahmin bull of mine's gone missing. Broke through the fence last night." Earl's voice carried the resigned tone of a man who'd seen too many seasons to get overly excited about anything. "Normally wouldn't bother you with it, but thought you should know. It's that old one with the heart-shaped mark, the one Sarah used to call Thunderheart," Mike finished, his throat suddenly tight. The name unlocked a flood of memories. Sarah bottle-feeding the orphaned calf in their kitchen, the bull following Mike around like an oversized dog, the way it would rest its massive head against Mike's chest when he sang old country songs at sunset. The same bull he'd been forced to sell to Earl after Sarah died, when medical bills threatened to take their home. The same bull that had once saved Mike's life. "Yeah, that's the one," Earl continued, unaware of Mike's sudden emotional turbulence. "Getting on in years now, just like us. Thought I'd let you know in case anyone reports it. Don't want some trigger-happy fool mistaking him for something wild." "I appreciate the heads up," Mike managed, his mind already calculating. "Any idea which direction he headed?" "South fence line was down, towards your eastern water holes, I reckon." Mike's gaze shifted to his GPS screen where the python tracks led in the same direction. A cold feeling settled in his stomach. "I'll keep an eye out," he promised, already turning the key in the ignition. As he steered toward the eastern section, his phone buzzed with a text from Jessica. "Bank called again. We need to talk tonight." Mike grimaced. The foreclosure notices had been piling up, his ranger's salary and upcoming pension insufficient against the mountain of Sarah's medical debt. Jessica had been helping, though he hated that she'd sacrificed her career for him. The truck bounced over the uneven terrain as Mike deliberately switched off the tracking system Dylan had installed in all Ranger vehicles last year. Some things weren't meant to be monitored. Some rules were meant to be broken. His mind drifted back 20 years to the day Thunderheart had saved him. Mike had been checking fence lines when he'd stepped too close to a western diamondback. The rattler had struck, but before it could sink its fangs into Mike's leg, the young bull had appeared from nowhere, stomping the snake into the dust. Sarah had always claimed the bull understood more than any animal should, that its eyes held an intelligence that defied explanation. "Just a good animal," Mike had always responded, uncomfortable with Sarah's fanciful notions. But privately, he'd wondered. The way Thunderheart watched them, the way it seemed to listen when they spoke, the way it had moaned for days after Sarah first went into the hospital. The truck crested a small rise and Mike slammed on the brakes. In the valley below, near the half-dried eastern water hole, something large and dark was moving through the tall grass. Mike grabbed his binoculars again, his heart pounding as he focused the lenses. A massive python, at least 15 feet long, was slithering with purpose toward something partially hidden in the grass. Something large, with a distinctive white patch visible even at this distance. A heart-shaped patch. "No," Mike whispered, dropping the binoculars and reaching for the radio before stopping himself. Protocol dictated non-interference with predator-prey interactions unless endangered species were involved. A python taking a domestic bull would be considered natural selection at work. The official preserve position would be to document it for research, not intervene. Mike's phone rang. Dylan's name flashed on the screen. He'd noticed the disabled tracker, no doubt. "Thompson," Mike answered tersely. "Your tracking system seems to be malfunctioning." Dylan's voice carried the smug certainty of someone half Mike's age with twice his confidence. "I'll need your coordinates for the log." Mike made a split-second decision. "I'm at the western boundary checking reports of trespassing." The lie came easily. "Signal's probably blocked by the ridge. I'll check in when I'm back in range." "That's not protocol." Mike hung up, tossing the phone onto the passenger seat. 45 years of following rules, of respecting the delicate balance between human intervention and natural process. 2 days from retirement. Everything to lose. And yet... Mike grabbed his rescue kit and stepped out of the truck, the Texas heat immediately enveloping him like a physical presence. The distant scene continued to unfold. The python had reached its target, was beginning to circle what was definitely Thunderheart. The bull seemed disoriented, possibly injured from its fence escape, moving too slowly to evade the predator. With each step Mike took down the hillside, memory overlapped with present reality. Sarah naming the calf Thunderheart because of the heart-shaped mark and the way he'd arrived during a summer storm. The bull standing guard outside Sarah's bedroom window during her final days, as if it somehow understood. The look in Thunderheart's eyes when Mike had led him onto Earl's trailer. A betrayal that haunted him still. "I'm sorry, old friend," Mike whispered as he moved faster, ignoring the protest in his knees. "I'm coming." Back at headquarters, Dylan frowned at his computer screen, watching Mike's GPS signal reappear briefly on the eastern section of the preserve, nowhere near where he'd claimed to be, before disappearing again. He picked up his phone to call Rebecca, but paused when Vernon Wilson's imposing figure appeared in his doorway. At 62, Vernon carried himself with military precision, his silver hair cropped short, his preserve director's uniform impeccable. His face, tanned from years in the Texas sun, rarely revealed emotion. "Problem?" Vernon asked, noting Dylan's expression. "Mike Thompson's off-grid again," Dylan replied. "Lied about his location." Vernon's mouth tightened slightly. 2 more days, he said, more to himself than to Dylan. "Then we can implement the new management protocols without his sentimentality." He fixed Dylan with a meaningful look. "Keep an eye on him. Document everything." "Yes, sir." Dylan nodded, understanding the unspoken promise. Mike's retirement would create an opening, and Vernon had made it clear who he favored as replacement. As Vernon departed, Dylan's phone buzzed with a text from Rebecca. "Dad pushing you to spy on Mike again?" Dylan didn't respond, uncomfortable with her characterization of what he considered professional diligence. Rebecca's loyalty to her father competed with her inexplicable respect for Mike Thompson's outdated methods. It was the one friction point in their relationship. Instead, he grabbed his keys and headed for his truck. Whatever Mike was up to, Dylan would make sure it was properly documented. 2 days before retirement was plenty of time for a man to make a career-ending mistake. Mike's boots pounded the dried earth as he abandoned caution for speed, his breath coming in ragged gasps. Ahead, the scene was unfolding with terrible clarity. The python had made its first strike, wrapping powerful coils around Thunderheart's hind legs. The bull bellowed, a deep, resonant sound that struck Mike like a physical blow. Despite its age and confusion, Thunderheart was fighting, trying to keep its massive head clear of the encroaching coils. "Hold on," Mike muttered, fumbling with his rescue kit as he ran. Inside was a snake hook, knife, and tranquilizer, standard equipment for dealing with reptiles that wandered into public areas, not standard equipment for interfering with a natural predation event. Every step took him further from protocol, from the career he'd built, from the pension he desperately needed. The radio on his belt crackled with Dylan's voice. "Thompson, confirm your location immediately." Mike ignored it, his focus narrowing to the struggling bull now just 50 yards away. The python had gained advantage, its muscular body now wrapped around Thunderheart's midsection. The bull's movements were becoming weaker, desperate. At 20 yards, Mike could see the recognition in Thunderheart's eyes, a flash of awareness as the old bull registered his presence. The animal made a sound Mike had never heard before, something between a bellow and a plea, and in that moment a memory slammed into him with breathtaking clarity. Sarah, sitting on their porch swing, Thunderheart's head in her lap as she scratched behind his ears. "Promise me something, Mike," she'd said, her voice already thinned by illness. "Promise you'll always look after him. He's more than just an animal." "I promise," he'd answered, not understanding then what it would cost him. The python tightened its grip, and Thunderheart's legs buckled. Mike dropped the rescue kit, drew his knife, and threw caution aside. He grabbed the snake's tail, yanking with strength born of desperation. The python's head whipped around, jaws open in threat. Mike dodged, using the momentum to pull more of the snake's length away from the bull. Thunderheart collapsed to the ground, chest heaving, but the python was far from subdued. It redirected its attack toward Mike, lightning fast. Pain exploded in Mike's left arm as the snake's teeth sank through his uniform sleeve, not venomous, but powerful, and now very angry. Mike staggered backward, trying to maintain his grip on the snake's body while avoiding its striking head. Blood soaked his sleeve as he slashed with his knife, aiming not to kill but to convince the python to retreat. "Let go, you son of a bitch," he growled, struggling for leverage on the uneven ground. His foot slipped, and he went down hard, the impact driving the air from his lungs. The python, sensing advantage, began to coil around Mike's legs. Then, unexpectedly, Thunderheart was on his feet again. The old bull, somehow finding reserves of strength, charged forward and drove his horns into the ground beside Mike, narrowly missing the python's body but startling it enough to loosen its grip. Mike rolled away, gasping, as bull and snake faced off in a bizarre standoff. The sound of an approaching vehicle barely registered until headlights swept across the scene. Mike's heart sank. Backup rangers meant witnesses. Witnesses meant reports. Reports meant the end of everything 2 days early. But it wasn't a ranger truck that skidded to a halt nearby. It was Jessica's battered Jeep. "Dad!" she screamed, taking in the bloody scene with professional detachment that immediately gave way to horror. "What the hell are you doing?" "Stay back!" Mike shouted, using the distraction to grab his snake hook from the fallen rescue kit. The python, momentarily confused by the new arrival, had retreated slightly, but still blocked the path between Mike and Thunderheart. Jessica ignored his warning, grabbing a cattle prod from her Jeep and approaching cautiously. "That's Earl's bull," she said, recognition dawning. "That's Thunderheart." "I know," Mike gasped, pain shooting through his injured arm. "We need to get him out of here before—" The rumble of engines cut him off as 2 ranger trucks appeared on the ridge, dust billowing behind them. Dylan's voice came through a megaphone. "Thompson, Stand down immediately. Jessica looked at her father, understanding the impossible situation. Dad, you can't interfere with a predation event. You know the rules. Some rules need breaking, Mike replied, his voice tight with pain and determination. Your mother made me promise. Jessica's expression softened slightly, but worry creased her brow. This will cost you everything. Some things cost more not to do, Mike answered, positioning himself between the python and the bull once more. The ranger trucks descended the hill, and Mike saw Dylan leap out, camera phone already recording. Behind him was Rebecca Wilson, her face a mask of professional concern as she took in the chaotic scene. "What the hell, Thompson?" Dylan shouted, keeping his distance from the agitated python. "You're interfering with a natural event. On record." "Natural my ass," Mike shot back. "That python's not native. Probably someone's pet dumped when it got too big." "That's not your call to make," Dylan replied, still filming. "And that bull doesn't belong on preserve land. Both animals need to be allowed to resolve this naturally." Rebecca approached more cautiously, her eyes darting from Mike's bloody arm to Thunderheart's heaving flanks. "You're injured," she said, concern overriding protocol momentarily. "Let us handle this." "The bull first," Mike insisted, swaying slightly as blood loss and adrenaline took their toll. Dylan seized the opportunity, signaling to the other rangers, "Restrain Thompson and get him medical attention. Document everything for the report." Two rangers moved toward Mike, but Jessica stepped between them. "Touch my father, and I'll have assault charges filed before sundown," she threatened, the cattle prod still in her hand. "He needs medical attention, which I'm qualified to provide." "The bull," Mike began, but Jessica cut him off. "I'll handle Thunderheart," she promised, her veterinarian's authority momentarily silencing even Dylan. "But you need to let me look at that arm now." While the standoff continued, Thunderheart had managed to put more distance between himself and the python, which was now coiling defensively, its feeding opportunity lost. The old bull stood trembling, sides heaving, but his eyes never left Mike. "That's Earl Jennings' bull," Rebecca said, suddenly recognition dawning, "the one with the heart mark." She turned to Dylan, whose camera was still recording. "We should call Earl to collect his property." "After we document the incident," Dylan insisted, "and that python needs to be captured and relocated, not driven off. Thompson has compromised an ecological interaction and injured protected wildlife." Mike allowed Jessica to lead him to her jeep, where she began cleaning his wound with supplies from her medical kit. From this position he could see Thunderheart watching him, the bull's familiar gaze filled with what Mike could only interpret as recognition and gratitude. "How did you find me?" Mike asked quietly as Jessica worked. "Tracker app on your phone," she admitted. "I installed it last year after you got lost checking the north fence." "The bank called about the foreclosure notice, and when I couldn't reach you..." She trailed off, focusing on bandaging his arm. "Dad, what were you thinking? 2 days from retirement?" "I was thinking about promises," Mike replied, his gaze still on Thunderheart. "Some debts can't be paid with money." Jessica followed his gaze, understanding softening her features. "That's why you sold him to Earl after Mom died." "For the medical bills." Mike nodded, the admission painful even years later. "Your mother made me promise to look after him. I broke that promise once. Couldn't do it again." Dylan approached, his camera now lowered, but his expression unyielding. "This is going in my report, Thompson. Interfering with wildlife, endangering yourself and others, lying about your location." He looked at Jessica. "Dr. Thompson, I need a statement about his injuries for the incident report." "You'll get my statement when I'm good and ready," Jessica replied coolly. "Right now, I have a patient to treat and a bull to examine." Rebecca joined them, her professional demeanor slightly softened. "Earl's on his way," she said. "Mike, This is serious. Dad's going to have to take action. Vernon's been looking for an excuse for years, Mike replied without rancor. Tell him he finally got one. Rebecca didn't deny it, her gaze dropping. The python's retreating into the brush. Animal control's been notified. Good, Mike said, then looked at Dylan directly. You got what you wanted. Documented evidence of the old-timer breaking the rules. Promotion should be yours now. Dylan had the grace to look uncomfortable. It's not about that, he insisted, though his tone lacked conviction. It's about proper wildlife management. Protocols exist for a reason. So do promises, Mike replied. As the tension hung in the air, the sound of another vehicle approached, Earl's ancient pickup, dust billowing behind it. The old rancher stepped out, taking in the scene with the unhurried manner of someone who'd seen it all. Well, he drawled, approaching Thunderheart with a halter in hand, looks like my fence wasn't the only thing this old bull broke today. Thunderheart, surprisingly, allowed Earl to approach and slip the halter over his massive head. The bull's eyes, however, remained fixed on Mike. You didn't tell me he was Sarah's bull, Dylan said quietly to Rebecca. The one Thompson raised. Rebecca shrugged. Would it have changed anything? But her expression suggested she knew the answer. Earl led Thunderheart toward his trailer, the bull moving stiffly from its ordeal, but apparently without serious injury. As they passed Mike and Jessica, the bull stopped, pulling against the halter until Earl reluctantly gave it slack. Thunderheart moved toward Mike, lowering his massive head until it rested against Mike's chest, exactly as he used to do 20 years ago when Mike would sing old country songs at sunset. The gesture, so familiar and yet from so long ago, brought a lump to Mike's throat. Hey, old friend, he whispered, his good hand coming up to stroke the bull's forehead, tracing the heart-shaped mark that had given him his name. Sarah would be proud of you. The moment stretched, witnessed by the assembled rangers in uncomfortable silence. Even Dylan lowered his camera, the intimacy of the scene somehow demanding respect. Finally, Earl gently tugged the halter. Come on, old-timer, he said, and it wasn't clear if he was addressing the bull or Mike. Time to go home. As Thunderheart was led away, Mike felt the weight of what he'd done settle fully upon him. 2 days from retirement, he'd broken fundamental preserve protocols, injured protected wildlife, and defied direct orders. The pension he needed to save his home, the legacy he'd hoped to leave, all sacrificed for a promise made to a woman 5 years in her grave, for a bull that probably didn't understand the cost of today's reunion. Jessica seemed to read his thoughts. We'll figure something out, she promised, though her tone lacked conviction. Let's get you to the clinic. That arm needs stitches. As they drove away, Dylan watched thoughtfully, the camera in his hand containing footage that could end Mike Thompson's career in disgrace. Rebecca stood beside him, her expression troubled. You're going to give that to my father, aren't you? She asked. Dylan didn't answer immediately, his gaze following the dust from Earl's departing truck. Protocol requires full documentation of all wildlife incidents, he finally said. That's not what I asked, Rebecca replied, walking back to her truck without waiting for his response. Left alone, Dylan replayed the footage, pausing on the moment the old bull had rested its head against Mike's chest. Something about that gesture tugged at him, reminiscent of the day Mike had found Dylan sitting alone at his father's funeral 7 years ago. Mike had said nothing, had simply sat beside him, a steady presence when words would have been inadequate. Dylan pocketed the phone, decisions weighing heavily as he returned to his truck. Vernon Wilson would be waiting for his report, a report that could give Dylan everything he'd been working toward. All it would cost was the dignity of a man who had given 45 years to the preserve. As the Texas sun began its descent toward the horizon, casting long shadows across the preserve, the consequences of the day's events were just beginning to unfold. The fluorescent lights of Jessica's small veterinary clinic buzzed overhead as she finished the last stitch on Mike's arm. Outside, darkness had fallen across the small Texas town of Oak Ridge, the preserve's looming silhouette visible only as a deeper shadow against the night sky. Mike sat stoically on the examination table, his ranger uniform stained with blood and dirt, his thoughts far away. 12 stitches, Jessica announced, cutting the surgical thread. You're lucky the python wasn't venomous. Wouldn't have mattered, Mike replied, his voice weary but unapologetic. Some things you just do. Jessica's hands stilled as she applied a bandage. Her father had always been stubborn, but this went beyond that. This was something deeper, something she'd struggled to understand since childhood. You risked everything today, she said quietly. Your pension, your reputation, our house. I know what I risked, Mike interrupted, finally meeting her gaze. What would you have done? Just let it happen? The question hung between them, highlighting the fundamental difference that had strained their relationship for years. Jessica, the pragmatist, the scientist; Mike, the man of principle and instinct. I would have followed protocol, she answered, but her tone lacked conviction. Called animal control, documented, and Thunderheart would be dead, Mike finished flatly. Another statistic in a report. Jessica sighed, removing her latex gloves with a snap. Is that what this is about? You feeling guilty because you sold him after Mom died? Mike's jaw tightened. Your mother made me promise to look after him. He was special to her. We were drowning in medical bills, Jessica reminded him gently. You did what you had to do. Did I? Mike stood, flexing his bandaged arm experimentally. I've spent 5 years telling myself that. But today, when I saw him recognize me, his voice caught. Some promises matter more than rules, Jess. The clinic door chimed, interrupting their conversation. Earl Jennings stood in the doorway, his weathered face grave beneath his battered cowboy hat. Hope I'm not interrupting, he said, stepping inside. Wanted to see how you were doing, Mike. Just patched up, Mike replied, gesturing to his arm. How's Thunderheart? Resting. Got some cuts from the python, nothing serious. Earl removed his hat, turning it in his hands, a gesture both men recognized as a prelude to difficult news. Vernon Wilson called me. Mike nodded, unsurprised. Figured he would. He's claiming Thunderheart is a hazard, says he attacked the python unprovoked on preserve land. Earl's disgust was evident. Wants him put down or moved off my property immediately. That's ridiculous, Jessica interjected. The bull was defending itself, and my father... Earl shrugged. Vernon doesn't see it that way. Says he's got video evidence from that young ranger, Dylan? Mike's expression darkened. Course he does. There's more, Earl continued reluctantly. Vernon mentioned something about the bull having an unusual ear tag, military-style identification he didn't recognize. Started asking questions about where I got him. Mike and Jessica exchanged glances. Military tag? Jessica asked. Thunderheart was just a regular breeding bull, wasn't he? Mike's hesitation was brief but noticeable. Sarah found him abandoned as a calf, he said carefully. He already had tags when we took him in. Nothing military about it, just standard cattle identification. Earl nodded, seemingly satisfied. That's what I thought. But Vernon's making a big deal about it, talking about proper authorities and national security concerns. Bunch of hogwash, if you ask me. Jessica's analytical mind raced ahead. Let me examine the tag, she offered. If it's just standard cattle ID, I can document it and put this nonsense to rest. Appreciate that, Earl said, replacing his hat. And Mike, a lot of folks around town heard what happened today. They're on your side. After Earl left, Jessica turned to her father. suspicion clouding her features. "What aren't you telling me about Thunderheart?" Mike sighed, suddenly looking every one of his 65 years. "Your mother didn't just find him abandoned," he admitted. "She rescued him." Rescued him from what? Mike moved to the window, staring out at the darkness. Sarah was working at the research center on the north side of the preserve back then, before they shut it down. She never talked much about her work there, said it was mostly administrative. But one night she came home with this calf hidden in the back of her car. Jessica stared at her father, piecing together fragments of memories. "Mom worked as a secretary, not a researcher." "That's what she told everyone," Mike agreed. "But she had advanced degrees in animal behavior. The work she did." He trailed off, shaking his head. "She said they were treating the animals cruelly, testing their intelligence, their memory, their capacity for bonding with humans. When she found out they were going to euthanize the calves that didn't meet their standards, she couldn't stand by and do nothing." Jessica absorbed this revelation about the mother she'd thought she'd known completely. "So Thunderheart was a research animal?" "He was just a calf," Mike corrected firmly. "Whatever they were doing, whatever they thought they were testing, he was just a scared, hungry calf who needed someone to care for him. Your mother gave him that. And the ear tag? Standard identification as far as I know. Sarah removed most of it, but some of the attachment was too close to a vein to safely cut away." Mike turned back to his daughter. "Vernon's fishing for something, Jess. He's wanted to repurpose that section of the preserve for commercial development for years." Jessica's phone buzzed with an incoming text. She glanced at it, her expression tightening. "It's Rebecca. Vernon's called an emergency board meeting for tomorrow morning. Dad, they're going to terminate you before your retirement date." Mike nodded, accepting the inevitable. "They can take my badge, but they can't touch my pension. Not if I've been terminated without cause 2 days before retirement." "That's why Vernon's pushing the military angle," Jessica realized. "If he can claim you knew Thunderheart had some special status and still intervened, he could argue you compromised national security." "It's a stretch," Mike said, but uncertainty crept into his voice. Sarah never mentioned anything about military involvement. Jessica was already grabbing her keys. "I need to check that ear tag tonight. If there's anything unusual about it, we need to know before Vernon builds his case." "I'll come with you," Mike started, but Jessica shook her head. "You need rest and plausible deniability." She hesitated at the door. "Dad, if there is something unusual about Thunderheart's background, would Mom have told you?" Mike considered the question, memories of Sarah's secretive nature surfacing. "I don't know," he admitted finally. "Your mother believed some secrets were better left buried." Across town, in the gleaming modern office of the preserve headquarters, Vernon Wilson studied the footage on Dylan's phone with increasing interest. "Freeze it there," he instructed, pointing to a frame showing the bull's ear. "Enhance that section." Dylan complied, though his discomfort was evident. "Sir, about Thompson's termination—" "This isn't about Thompson," Vernon cut him off, eyes fixed on the screen. "This is about Project Sentinel." "Project what?" Dylan asked, confused. Vernon waved away the question. "Before your time, look at that ear tag. See the marking?" He pointed to a barely visible insignia. "That's not standard cattle identification." "What is it then?" Dylan asked, peering at the screen. Vernon's expression was unreadable. "Evidence that Mike Thompson has been harboring a very valuable piece of government property." He picked up his phone. "I need to make some calls. This changes everything." Rebecca entered, carrying a stack of files. She glanced between her father and Dylan, sensing the tension. "What changes everything?" "Nothing that concerns you," Vernon replied dismissively. "Did you schedule the emergency board meeting?" "Yes," Rebecca confirmed, her tone professional despite her evident disapproval. 9 a.m. tomorrow. All board members have confirmed." "Good." Vernon turned to Dylan. "I want Thompson's complete file on my desk in an hour." Every incident report, every performance review, every complaint, there has to be something we can use. After Vernon strode out, Rebecca confronted Dylan. "What are you doing? Mike has given his entire life to this preserve." "I'm doing my job," Dylan defended, though he couldn't quite meet her eyes. Thompson broke protocol. He interfered with wildlife, endangered himself. "He saved an animal he cared about," Rebecca interrupted. "Tell me you wouldn't have done the same." "That's not the point," Dylan insisted. "Rules exist for a reason. Without them, conservation becomes chaos, subject to emotional whims rather than scientific management." Rebecca shook her head, disappointment evident. "My father's wanted Mike gone for years. He's using you to do his dirty work, and you're letting him because you think it'll advance your career." "That's not fair," Dylan protested. "Isn't it?" Rebecca challenged. "You've been compiling evidence against Mike for months. I've seen the file on your computer." Dylan's silence was damning. "I thought you were better than this," Rebecca said quietly, heading for the door. "I guess I was wrong." Left alone, Dylan stared at the frozen image on his phone, the moment Thunderheart had rested his head against Mike's chest. The gesture had seemed so deliberate, so full of recognition. Dylan's father had been a rancher before his death, and Dylan had grown up around cattle. He'd never seen behavior like that from a bull toward a human. Curiosity piqued, Dylan began researching unusual cattle behavior, specifically Brahman intelligence and memory capacity. Most sources cited standard information about the breed's hardiness and adaptation to heat. But one obscure journal article caught his attention: Enhanced Cognitive Recognition in Select Bovine Subjects, the Sentinel Study. The article was sparse on details and heavily redacted, but it mentioned a research program focused on developing livestock with enhanced memory and recognition abilities. The goal, apparently, was to create animals that could reliably return to designated locations after free-range grazing, eliminating the need for constant herding. The article included one photograph, a young Brahman calf with a distinctive heart-shaped mark on its forehead. Dylan stared at the image, then back at the frozen frame on his phone. The implications were unsettling. If Thunderheart was indeed part of this research program, and if Vernon knew about it, then his interest went far beyond enforcing preserve protocols. As Dylan dug deeper, he discovered the research had been conducted at a facility on what was now the northern section of the preserve, the exact area Vernon had been pushing to sell for commercial development. The facility had been shut down abruptly 20 years ago, all records sealed, and the land incorporated into the preserve through a federal mandate that Vernon had fought bitterly. Pieces began falling into place. Vernon's obsession with developing that section of land. His unusually strong reaction to Mike's intervention with Thunderheart. The military-style ear tag. Dylan's phone buzzed with a text from Rebecca. "Check Dad's special filing cabinet. Combination is Mom's birthday." Dylan hesitated only briefly before making his decision. Mike Thompson had broken the rules, yes, but there was clearly more to this story than a ranger's sentimental attachment to an old bull. Meanwhile, Jessica arrived at Earl's ranch, medical bag in hand. The old rancher led her to the barn where Thunderheart was resting in a spacious stall, his massive form barely visible in the dim light. "He's been restless," Earl commented, switching on a brighter light. "Keeps looking toward the door like he's expecting someone." Jessica approached the stall cautiously. Despite growing up with Thunderheart, she'd always maintained a professional distance from animals, a defense mechanism against the pain of inevitable loss. Her mother had been the one who named them, who sang to them, who treated them like family members. Jessica had chosen science over sentiment, facts over feelings. But as Thunderheart raised his head, his eyes locking with hers in unmistakable recognition, Jessica felt something shift inside her. This wasn't just any animal. This was a living connection to her mother, to her childhood, to the family they'd once been. "Hey, big guy," she said softly, entering the stall. "Remember me?" Thunderheart moved toward her with surprising gentleness for such a massive animal. He lowered his head, not threatening but inviting, and Jessica found herself reaching out to stroke the white heart-shaped patch on his forehead. "I need to check your ear tag," she explained, feeling slightly foolish for talking to him as if he could understand. "It might help us keep you safe." The bull stood perfectly still as Jessica examined the partially removed ear tag. Most of it had been cut away years ago, but a small section remained embedded in the ear tissue. Under her penlight, Jessica could make out a faded insignia, not the standard USDA marking, but something more complex. She photographed it from several angles. "Anything unusual?" Earl asked from outside the stall. "I'm not sure," Jessica answered honestly. "I'll need to research it." She completed her examination of the bull, treating the minor wounds from his encounter with the python. "He's in remarkable condition for his age," she noted. "How old is he now?" "Going on 22, Earl replied. "Ancient for a bull, but he's still got more spirit than animals half his age. Sarah always said he was special." Jessica nodded, her scientific mind cataloging observations. Unusual longevity, exceptional recognition abilities, remarkable memory. Individually, each could be explained away. Together, they painted a picture of something beyond normal bovine capabilities. As she prepared to leave, Thunderheart moved to block her path, his massive body positioning itself between Jessica and the door. He lowered his head again, this time nudging insistently at her pocket. "What is it, boy?" she asked, mystified by his behavior. Thunderheart continued nudging until Jessica reached into her pocket, pulling out her keys. Attached to the key ring was a small metal disc, Sarah's old lucky charm that Jessica had kept after her mother's death. The bull's reaction was immediate and unmistakable. He made a soft sound, almost a rumble of recognition, and gently touched his nose to the charm. "He remembers," Earl said quietly from the doorway. "Sarah used to wear that on a chain around her neck. I'd swear that bull knows exactly what it is." Jessica stared at Thunderheart, scientific skepticism warring with the evidence before her eyes. "That's impossible," she whispered, but without conviction. "Cattle don't have that kind of specific object recognition or long-term memory." "Maybe most don't," Earl agreed. "But your mother always insisted Thunderheart wasn't like other bulls." Jessica's phone buzzed with an incoming call from an unknown number. She answered cautiously. "Dr. Thompson?" A woman's voice, unfamiliar and urgent. "My name is Dr. Eleanor Reeves. I worked with your mother at the research facility 20 years ago. We need to talk about Thunderheart." "How did you get this number?" Jessica demanded. "Your mother gave it to me for emergencies," the woman replied. "And believe me, this qualifies. Vernon Wilson has contacted the Research Oversight Committee. They're sending a team to collect the bull." "Collect him for what?" "Termination and tissue sampling," Dr. Reeves said grimly. "They want to destroy the evidence of what we did there." Jessica's blood ran cold. "What exactly did you do?" "I can't explain over the phone. Meet me at the old North Ridge cabin in 1 hour. Come alone and don't tell anyone where you're going." The line went dead. Jessica stared at her phone, then at Thunderheart, who was watching her with those uncannily intelligent eyes. Whatever secrets her mother had kept, whatever truth lay behind Thunderheart's unusual abilities, Jessica knew one thing with certainty: she would not let them destroy this living link to her mother. "Earl," she said decisively, "we need to move Thunderheart. Tonight." "Where to?" the old rancher asked. Jessica thought of her father's small hunting cabin, isolated in the hills beyond the preserve's boundaries. Somewhere Vernon Wilson would never think to look. As she left the barn, Jessica texted her father. "Something's wrong. Thunderheart in danger. Meeting source about mom's research. Will call when safe. Across town, Mike read the message with growing alarm. The pieces were falling into place. Sarah's secretive work, her insistence that Thunderheart was special, Vernon's sudden interest in a seemingly ordinary bull. Whatever truth had been buried 20 years ago was resurfacing, and his daughter was now caught in the middle of it. Despite his injured arm and exhaustion, Mike reached for his truck keys. Some secrets couldn't stay buried forever, and some promises transcended time, duty, and even death itself. The Northridge cabin stood silhouetted against the star-filled Texas sky, a small, weathered structure nearly reclaimed by the surrounding wilderness. Jessica parked her Jeep a quarter-mile away and approached on foot, veterinary instincts heightening her awareness of every snapping twig and rustling leaf. The moon cast long shadows across the clearing as she reached the cabin's porch, hand hovering near the canister of pepper spray in her pocket. "Dr. Thompson?" A woman's voice came from the darkness beside the cabin. "Thank you for coming." Jessica turned to see an older woman emerge from the shadows. Dr. Eleanor Reeves looked to be in her 70s, with silver hair pulled back in a severe bun and the erect posture of someone accustomed to authority. Despite the late hour and remote location, she wore a pressed blouse and slacks, as if meeting in an abandoned cabin were a perfectly normal professional engagement. "You worked with my mother," Jessica said, not bothering to phrase it as a question. Dr. Reeves nodded, gesturing toward the cabin door. "Let's talk inside. The walls here are the only ones I'm certain aren't listening." The interior was sparse but clean, illuminated by a battery-powered lantern that cast ghostly shadows across the log walls. A folder of documents lay on the simple wooden table alongside what appeared to be old photographs. "Your mother was a remarkable woman," Dr. Reeves began, settling into a chair that creaked under her slight weight. "Brilliant, compassionate, and ultimately too ethical for the work we were doing." "Which was what, exactly?" Jessica remained standing, unwilling to relax into this bizarre scenario. "Officially, livestock intelligence enhancement." Dr. Reeves spread several photographs across the table. The goal was to develop cattle that could recognize and return to designated locations after free-range grazing. Economically valuable traits, especially in remote ranching operations. Jessica picked up one of the photos, a sterile-looking laboratory with several cattle pens visible. Young calves, including one with a distinctive heart-shaped marking, were fitted with elaborate monitoring equipment. "And unofficially?" she asked, already dreading the answer. Dr. Reeves sighed, suddenly looking every year of her age. "The military became interested when our early subjects showed unexpected cognitive abilities. The research shifted toward exploring whether enhanced livestock could serve as battlefield companions, animals that could recognize specific soldiers, remember complex routes, even distinguish between friendly and hostile human behavior patterns." "That's absurd," Jessica scoffed, her scientific mind rebelling. "Cattle aren't dogs or horses. They don't have the neural architecture for that kind of cognition." "That's what the literature said," Dr. Reeves agreed. But Thunderheart and several others in his cohort defied those limitations. They demonstrated recognition abilities, memory formation, and bonding patterns well beyond normal bovine capacity. Jessica thought of Thunderheart's reaction to her mother's charm, his immediate recognition of her father after years of separation. "How?" she demanded. "What did you do to them?" "A combination of selective breeding, conditioning, and nutritional supplements," Dr. Reeves explained. "Nothing sinister or invasive. We weren't creating monsters, Dr. Thompson. We were simply encouraging traits that already existed in marginal form." "Until the military got involved," Jessica guessed. Dr. Reeves nodded grimly. "They wanted to explore more aggressive applications. Your mother objected strenuously. When she discovered they planned to euthanize the underperforming subjects for tissue analysis, She took action. She stole Thunderheart, Jessica concluded, memories of her childhood rearranging themselves into a new pattern, the secretive phone calls, the unexpected trips, her mother's insistence that Thunderheart was special and needed protection. She rescued him, Dr. Reeves corrected. And in doing so, she effectively ended the program. Without our star subject, funding was cut. The facility was shuttered within months. But why would Vernon Wilson care about this now? Jessica asked, struggling to connect these decades-old events to the present crisis. The research is ancient history. Dr. Reeves opened the folder on the table, revealing land surveys and development plans. Because the northern section of the preserve sits on valuable real estate, Vernon's been trying to sell it to developers for years, but federal protection prevents him. If he can prove the land was originally acquired through fraudulent means, say, to cover up a failed military research program, he might break that protection. And Thunderheart is living proof of what happened there, Jessica realized, which makes him dangerous to people with something to hide. Precisely. Dr. Reeves handed Jessica a flash drive. This contains everything I could salvage from the research data. Notes, observations, videos. Your mother's contributions are all there too. Jessica pocketed the drive, a new urgency overtaking her. I need to get back to Thunderheart. If what you're saying is true, the sound of vehicles approaching cut her off. Headlights swept across the cabin windows as multiple trucks pulled into the clearing. Dr. Reeves moved to the window, peering through a gap in the curtains. Vernon, she confirmed grimly. And he's not alone. Outside, Vernon Wilson emerged from a black SUV, flanked by two men in dark uniforms. Even from a distance, Jessica could see the military bearing in their posture, the disciplined precision of their movements. How did they find us? Jessica whispered, backing away from the window. I don't know, Dr. Reeves admitted. But we need to leave. Now. There's no time, Jessica countered, quickly assessing their options. Is there another way out? Root cellar. Connects to an old mining tunnel. Dr. Reeves moved swiftly to a faded rug, pulling it aside to reveal a trap door. Your mother and I used it during the final days of the program when we were smuggling research data out. As Dr. Reeves pulled the trapdoor open, Jessica's phone buzzed with an incoming text. It was from Dylan. Vernon tracking your phone. Military team en route to Earl's ranch. Jessica's blood ran cold. They're going after Thunderheart. Then we need to beat them there, Dr. Reeves said, already descending into the darkness below. This tunnel comes out near the old fire road. We can circle back to your vehicle from there. Jessica hesitated, eyeing her phone. The smart move would be to leave it behind to prevent further tracking, but doing so would cut her off from her father and any updates about Thunderheart. Making a split-second decision, she tucked the phone into a crevice between logs in the cabin wall. If Vernon wanted to track something, let him track an empty cabin. Following Dr. Reeves into the musty darkness of the tunnel, Jessica felt fear and determination warring within her. The rational, scientific part of her mind still struggled with the implications of what she'd learned. The emotional part, the part that remembered her mother's love for Thunderheart, her father's desperate rescue attempt, already accepted the truth. Thunderheart was special, and people with power wanted him eliminated. Across the preserve, Mike Thompson's truck bumped along the rarely used back roads, his injured arm throbbing with each jolt. He'd tried calling Jessica repeatedly, receiving only voicemail. His weathered face was set in grim determination as he drove toward Earl's ranch, guided by instinct and the knowledge of the preserve's terrain that came from 45 years of service. The radio crackled to life, startling him. Mike, you there? It was Rebecca Wilson's voice, using the emergency channel they both knew was monitored. Go ahead, Mike responded cautiously. Dad's mobilized a team to Earl's ranch, Rebecca said, her voice tight with controlled urgency. He's claiming jurisdiction over Thunderheart as escaped research property. They're planning to transport him to a secure facility for examination and—" She paused. Termination. Mike's grip tightened on the steering wheel. "On what authority?" "Some old military research contract," Rebecca replied. "Dad had it in his private files, along with documentation about your wife's involvement in the project." The mention of Sarah sent a jolt of protectiveness through Mike. "Your father doesn't know what he's dealing with," he said grimly. "I think he does," Rebecca countered. "Mike, there's more. Dylan found financial records. If Dad can get the north section of the preserve declassified from federal protection, he stands to make millions from developers. He needs Thunderheart gone to make that happen." "Where's Jessica?" Mike demanded, mentally calculating the fastest route to Earl's property. "I don't know," Rebecca admitted. "Her phone was traced to the North Ridge cabin, but when they got there it was empty." Mike allowed himself a small smile despite the circumstances. His daughter was smart, smarter than Vernon gave her credit for. "Listen carefully, Rebecca. I need you to delay your father's team any way you can. Paperwork, questions, whatever it takes." "Already on it," she assured him. "Dylan's helping too." The information surprised Mike. "Barrett, I thought he was your father's golden boy." "Let's just say his conscience finally kicked in," Rebecca replied. "Be careful, Mike. These men with Dad aren't local. They're serious, and they're armed." The transmission ended, leaving Mike alone with his thoughts and the dark Texas night. He made a quick decision, turning the truck toward a different destination. If Vernon was heading to Earl's ranch, that's the last place Thunderheart should be. At Earl's ranch, the old rancher stood on his porch, shotgun resting casually across his arms as Vernon Wilson's convoy pulled into his yard. Floodlights illuminated the scene with harsh clarity, casting long shadows across the dusty ground. "Evening, Vernon," Earl called, making no move to descend the porch steps. "Little late for a social call." Vernon stepped forward, flanked by uniformed men. His silver hair gleamed under the floodlights, his posture military straight despite his age. "This isn't social, Earl. We're here for the bull, official preserve business." "Funny thing about that," Earl drawled, unhurried. "Bull ain't here." Vernon's expression hardened. "Don't play games, Jennings. We know Thompson's daughter brought him back here after the Python incident." "She did," Earl acknowledged. "Fine animal doctor, that girl. Patched him up real nice. Then they left." "Left for where?" Vernon demanded, his composure slipping. Earl shrugged. "Didn't ask. Figured it wasn't my business where a man takes his own property." "That bull is not Thompson's property," Vernon snapped. "It's government property, part of a classified research program." "That so?" Earl raised an eyebrow, clearly unimpressed. "'Cause I got bill of sale says otherwise. Purchased him fair and square 5 years back." "Got the paperwork in the house if you'd like to see it." Vernon signaled to one of the uniformed men who produced an official-looking document. "This supersedes any civilian purchase agreement. That animal contains valuable research data and poses a potential security risk." Earl's weathered face betrayed no emotion, but his grip on the shotgun tightened slightly. "Security risk? He's a 22-year-old bull with arthritis, Vernon. Only risk he poses is to your fancy shoes, if you stand behind him." "Search the property," Vernon ordered his men, ignoring Earl's sarcasm. "The barn, the outbuildings, everywhere." "Now, hold on," Earl protested, taking a step forward. "You got no right to search my property without a warrant." "This is a matter of national security," Vernon countered smoothly. "Standard protocols don't apply." As the uniformed men spread out across the property, Earl watched helplessly, his weathered face a mask of controlled anger. One of the men approached the main barn, pulling the heavy door open to reveal nothing. The stall where Thunderheart had been housed stood empty, fresh straw covering the floor. "Sir, the bull's not here," the man reported, returning to Vernon's side. Vernon's face contorted with barely controlled rage. "Where is it, Earl? Where did Thompson take it?" "Like I said, I didn't ask." Earl's voice remained steady. "But wherever they went, I reckon they had good reason for going." Vernon stepped closer, lowering his voice. "You're interfering with official business, Jennings. That could go very badly for you." "Threatening an old man on his own property," Earl observed mildly. "That seems about your speed, Vernon. Always was." Before Vernon could respond, one of the uniformed men approached with a tablet. "Sir, we've got a lead. Thompson's truck was spotted heading toward the Western Preserve boundary. Satellite imagery shows a structure there, some kind of cabin." Vernon's expression shifted from anger to satisfaction. "Thompson's hunting cabin? Of course." He turned back to Earl. "This isn't over, Jennings." "Never figured it was," Earl replied, watching impassively as Vernon and his men returned to their vehicles. As the convoy disappeared down his driveway, Earl reached for his phone, dialing a number from memory. "They're headed your way," he said simply when the call connected. "Make sure you're ready." Deep in the remote western section of the preserve, Mike Thompson stood on the porch of his small hunting cabin, watching as Jessica's Jeep bounced up the rutted dirt road, followed by an unfamiliar sedan. The cabin, built by Mike's father decades ago, sat on a small parcel of private land completely surrounded by the preserve, an island of Thompson ownership in a sea of federal protection. Jessica emerged from her Jeep, looking exhausted but determined. "Doctor." Reeves followed more slowly, her eyes taking in the rustic cabin and its surroundings with clear approval. "Smart location," she commented. "Legally, they can't cross private property without a specific warrant, even with their security clearances." "Dad built it back when the land was all ranch territory," Mike explained. "Refused to sell when the preserve was established. Said a man needs somewhere that belongs just to him." Jessica embraced her father briefly, mindful of his injured arm. "How's Thunderheart?" "See for yourself," Mike replied, gesturing toward the small barn behind the cabin. Inside, illuminated by a single battery-powered lantern, Thunderheart stood calmly in a makeshift stall. The bull's massive head turned at their entrance, his intelligent eyes immediately focusing on Jessica. "Earl helped me move him while you were meeting with Dr. Reeves," Mike explained. "Figured Vernon would head to the ranch first." "You knew about the meeting?" Jessica asked, surprised. Mike smiled slightly. "Eleanor and I go way back. She called me right after she called you." Dr. Reeves approached Thunderheart with professional interest, keeping a respectful distance. "He's in remarkable condition for his age. The enhanced cognitive functions seem to have correlated with extended physical vitality as well." "He's not a research subject anymore," Jessica said firmly, moving to stand protectively beside the bull. "He's family." "Of course," Dr. Reeves agreed quickly. "That's why I'm here, to help protect him." Mike's expression remained guarded. "Why now, Eleanor? You stayed silent for 20 years. "Because the program is being revived," Dr. Reeves replied gravely. "Not with cattle this time, but with other species. Vernon's land deal is just part of a larger effort to erase the evidence of past research failures before moving forward with new funding. And Thunderheart is living proof of those failures," Jessica concluded. "Or successes, depending on your perspective," Dr. Reeves corrected. "He demonstrates that the cognitive enhancement was achievable, but also reveals the ethical problems that come with creating animals too intelligent for their intended purpose." Mike moved to Thunderheart's side, placing a gentle hand on the bull's massive shoulder. "You always were too smart for your own good, weren't you, old friend?" Thunderheart leaned slightly into Mike's touch, a gesture so human-like it sent a shiver down Jessica's spine. The bull's eyes seemed to hold understanding beyond what any animal should possess, a spark of something that bordered on personhood. "So what now?" Jessica asked, looking between her father and Dr. Reeves. Vernon knows about this place. It's only a matter of time before he shows up with his team. Now we make a stand, Mike said simply. This is private property. They can't legally take him without proper documentation, which they don't have because the program never officially existed. Vernon has forged documentation, Dr. Reeves warned, and military backing. Then we need leverage, Jessica decided, pulling out the flash drive Dr. Reeves had given her. Everything on this, can we use it to keep Thunderheart safe? Dr. Reeves hesitated. It's classified information. Releasing it would have serious consequences. More serious than letting them kill an innocent animal to cover up their mistakes? Jessica challenged. Before Dr. Reeves could respond, the distant sound of vehicles reached them. Mike moved to the barn door, peering out into the darkness. Headlights on the access road, he reported grimly. Multiple vehicles. That was fast, Jessica said, checking her watch. How did they find us so quickly? Dr. Reeves looked away, guilt flashing across her features. I'm sorry, she said quietly. I didn't have a choice. Understanding dawned on Mike's face. You led them here. They were going to revoke my pension, my medical coverage, Dr. Reeves explained, her voice breaking. I'm 82 years old with stage 4 cancer, Mike. I have nothing else. Jessica stared at the older woman, betrayal and pity warring in her expression. So, you sacrificed Thunderheart? No, Dr. Reeves insisted, reaching into her pocket and withdrawing a small device. I bought us time. This jams GPS signals within a half-mile radius. As far as Vernon's team knows, we're still in the eastern sector, heading toward the old research facility. Mike studied Dr. Reeves with renewed respect. Double cross, Sarah would have approved. Your wife taught me that principle matters more than protocol, Dr. Reeves replied, a hint of her former strength returning. Now, we have perhaps an hour before they realize they've been misdirected. We need to move Thunderheart somewhere they'd never think to look. Where? Jessica asked. They'll have the entire preserve under surveillance by morning. A slow smile spread across Mike's weathered face. Not the entire preserve, he said. There's one place Vernon would never search because he spent 20 years trying to pretend it doesn't exist. Understanding dawned on Dr. Reeves's face. The old research facility. Hiding in plain sight, Mike confirmed. The one place Vernon would never willingly return to, because it contains too many secrets he'd rather keep buried. The headlights of Vernon's convoy disappeared in the distance, following the false trail Dr. Reeves had laid. In the small barn, surrounded by shadows and uncertainty, Mike, Jessica, and Dr. Reeves began formulating a plan that would either save Thunderheart or condemn them all. The bull watched them with those impossibly knowing eyes, somehow understanding that his fate and theirs hung in precarious balance. 3 days had passed since Thunderheart disappeared. The Texas sun beat down mercilessly on the search teams combing the preserve, their vehicles raising dust clouds visible for miles across the flat terrain. Vernon Wilson stood beside his SUV, wiping sweat from his brow as he studied the search grid on his tablet. His normally immaculate appearance had deteriorated, shirt wrinkled, eyes bloodshot from lack of sleep. Nothing in sectors 7 through 12, reported one of the uniformed men, approaching with military precision despite the heat. No signs of recent passage or disturbance. Vernon's jaw tightened. Expand the perimeter. They can't have vanished into thin air. Sir, we've been searching for 72 hours straight, the man pointed out carefully. My team needs rest, and we're burning through resources that weren't budgeted for this operation. I don't care about your budget, Vernon snapped. That bull represents 20 years of research and millions in potential land development. Find it! As the man retreated, Rebecca approached, her professional demeanor firmly in place despite the strain evident in her eyes. "Dad, the board is asking questions. They want to know why we've shut down normal preserve operations for a search that hasn't been properly explained." "Tell them it's a matter of preserve security," Vernon replied dismissively. "I've been telling them that for 3 days," Rebecca countered. "They're not buying it anymore, and the media's starting to sniff around. A reporter from the Oak Ridge Gazette was asking about Mike Thompson's termination and the mysterious military presence on the preserve." Vernon turned to face his daughter fully, his expression hardening. "Handle it, Rebecca. That's your job." "My job is preserve administration, not covering up whatever this really is," she replied, her professional tone slipping. "Dad, what's going on?" "This isn't about a missing bull anymore, is it?" Vernon studied her for a long moment, calculation evident in his gaze. "You've always been smart, Rebecca. Too smart sometimes." He lowered his voice. "The northern section of the preserve sits on land worth over $50 million to developers. Land that's been locked under federal protection because of what happened there 20 years ago. If we can prove that protection was based on fraudulent research, the classification gets lifted. And you get a percentage of the development deal," Rebecca concluded, pieces falling into place. "That's what this is about." "Money?" "It's about correction of a historical mistake," Vernon insisted. "That land should never have been incorporated into the preserve. The research facility there was doing important work that could have continued if not for Sarah Thompson's emotional interference." Rebecca took a step back, reassessing her father with new eyes. "So Mike was right. You've been targeting him for years because of what his wife did." "Mike Thompson is a relic," Vernon dismissed, "an obstacle to progress. His sentimentality has no place in modern conservation." "His sentimentality is why half the species in this preserve still exist," Rebecca countered, anger finally breaking through her professional veneer. "While you've been mapping development potential, he's been protecting this land the way it's supposed to be protected." Vernon's expression darkened. "I didn't raise you to be naive, Rebecca. Conservation is a business like any other. Resources are allocated based on value and return." "You didn't raise me at all," Rebecca replied quietly. "Mom did. And she taught me that some things matter more than money." She straightened, decision made. "I'm calling the board for an emergency meeting. They deserve to know what's really happening here." As she turned to leave, Vernon grabbed her arm. "Think carefully about your next move," he warned. "Your career, your future, everything depends on how you handle this moment." Rebecca looked pointedly at his hand until he released her. "No, Dad. Everything depends on whether I can live with myself tomorrow." She walked away, back straight, leaving Vernon staring after her with a mixture of anger and calculation. Across the preserve, in the abandoned research facility that had once housed Project Sentinel, Mike Thompson sat beside a small camp stove, heating water for coffee. The facility, a sprawling complex of low concrete buildings, had been officially decommissioned decades ago, stripped of equipment and sealed. Unofficially, it had become a storage site for preserve maintenance equipment, its existence acknowledged on maps but conveniently forgotten in Vernon's ambitious development plans. Mike's injured arm throbbed in the damp morning air that permeated the old building. 3 days of hiding, of sleeping on concrete floors and constantly watching for search teams had taken its toll on his 65-year-old body. But each twinge of pain was worth it when he looked across the room at Thunderheart, standing calmly in what had once been his first home. Jessica entered from an adjoining room, medical bag in hand. Dark circles shadowed her eyes, her normally neat appearance rumpled from days without proper rest. "Dr. Reeves' fever is worse," she reported quietly. "The stress and conditions aren't helping her cancer. She needs a hospital, Dad." Mike nodded grimly. I know. But the moment she leaves, we lose our only expert witness. We might lose her anyway if she doesn't get proper care, Jessica countered, the doctor and her conflicting with the strategist they'd all been forced to become. Before Mike could respond, the door opened and Dylan Barrett slipped inside, carrying a backpack bulging with supplies. His ranger uniform was gone, replaced by civilian clothes that wouldn't attract attention. Vernon's expanded the search perimeter again, he reported, setting down the backpack. They're focusing on the eastern boundary, thinking you might try to move Thunderheart out of the preserve entirely. Good, Mike said. That keeps them far from here. Any news from Rebecca? Dylan's expression tightened. She's called an emergency board meeting for tomorrow morning. Plans to expose everything. The research program, Vernon's development deals, your wrongful termination. Vernon won't let that happen easily, Mike warned. She knows, Dylan replied, a hint of pride in his voice despite the circumstances. But Rebecca's stronger than her father realizes. Jessica began unpacking the supplies Dylan had brought. Food, medicine, fresh bandages for Mike's arm. Any word on the board's reaction to Dad's termination? Mixed, Dylan admitted. Some are questioning Vernon's timing and methods, especially with retirement so close. Others are backing him based on the protocol violations. Mike shrugged his good shoulder, wincing slightly at the movement. Protocol was always going to be Vernon's weapon of choice. Man loves his rule book, at least when it serves his purpose. Thunderheart shifted in his makeshift pen, drawing Mike's attention. The bull had been remarkably calm throughout the ordeal, as if he somehow understood the need for quiet and patience. Now he turned his massive head toward the door, ears flicking forward in alert attention. Mike rose slowly, hand moving instinctively to the rifle leaning against the wall. Someone's coming. Dylan moved to the small window, peering through the grime-covered glass. Single vehicle approaching slowly. Wait, it's Earl. Relief flooded through Mike as Dylan went to let the old rancher in. Earl entered carrying another supply bag, his weathered face grim beneath his ever-present cowboy hat. Brought more provisions, he announced without preamble. Figured you might be running low. We are, Jessica acknowledged gratefully. How did you find us? Earl's leathery face creased in a slight smile. Wasn't hard. Mike and I used to store fishing gear here back before it became official ranger-only territory. He glanced around the dilapidated facility. Place hasn't improved with age. Neither have I, Mike quipped, though the humor didn't reach his eyes. What's the word in town? Earl's expression sobered. Not good. Vernon's got the local paper printing that you stole valuable preserve property, possibly for illegal sale. Some are buying it, especially with those military types backing his story. Others, he paused. Others remember who's been the heart of this preserve for 45 years. They're asking questions. Questions won't help when Vernon gets a seizure order, Mike said, the reality of their situation weighing heavily. We're running out of options, Earl. Maybe not, Earl replied, reaching into his pocket and withdrawing a folded document. Rebecca asked me to bring this. Came in this morning from the State Veterinary Board. Jessica took the paper, unfolding it carefully. Her eyes widened as she read. It's a health quarantine order signed by the state veterinarian, citing potential disease risk. No cattle can be moved from the preserve without proper testing and clearance. She looked up, understanding dawning. This buys us time. 48 hours at most, Earl cautioned. Vernon's already working to get it overturned. Mike took the document, studying it with grudging admiration. Rebecca's smarter than I gave her credit for. Vernon can't openly defy a state health order without raising even more questions. A weak voice called from the adjoining room. Is that Earl I hear? Dr. Reeves appeared in the doorway, leaning heavily against the frame. Her condition had deteriorated rapidly over the past 3 days, her once dignified appearance now haggard, skin yellowed with advancing disease. Still, her eyes remained sharp, taking in the new arrival with interest. "Eleanor," Earl acknowledged with a respectful nod. "Been a long time." "Not long enough for some," she replied with a ghost of her former acerbity. "Vernon still wants me dead, I presume?" "Not actively," Earl replied, "but I wouldn't put it on my Christmas card list." Jessica moved to Dr. Reeves's side, supporting her frail form. "You should be resting." "I'll rest soon enough," Dr. Reeves dismissed. "Permanently, in fact. But before I do, I need to share something." She gestured toward the backpack Dylan had brought. "Is there a laptop in there? Something I can use to access this?" She held up the flash drive Jessica had been guarding since their meeting at the cabin. Dylan nodded, producing a tablet from the backpack. As Dr. Reeves settled at the small table, connecting the drive with trembling hands, Mike moved to check on Thunderheart. The bull acknowledged him with a gentle nudge of his massive head, a gesture so trusting it made Mike's throat tighten with emotion. "We're doing our best, old friend," he murmured, stroking the white heart-shaped mark on the bull's forehead. "Sarah would be proud of how brave you've been." Jessica watched the interaction with scientific fascination warring with emotional impact. All her training told her animals didn't possess this level of understanding, this capacity for trust and recognition after years of separation, yet the evidence stood before her, impossible to deny. "Here!" Dr. Reeves called, her voice stronger as she accessed the files. "This is what Vernon is really afraid of." They gathered around the tablet, watching as a video began to play. It showed a younger Sarah Thompson in a lab coat speaking directly to the camera. "Project Sentinel log, final entry," she began, her face serious but determined. "Today, I'm terminating my involvement with this research and reporting its ethical violations to the appropriate authorities. The cognitive enhancement protocols have succeeded beyond our projections, creating animals with memory, recognition, and emotional capacities that raise profound ethical questions about their treatment as research subjects." The video cut to footage of young calves, including one with Thunderheart's distinctive marking, demonstrating remarkable problem-solving abilities and human recognition patterns. "These animals are experiencing fear, loneliness, and attachment," Sarah continued in voiceover. "Continuing to treat them as simple test subjects is no longer ethically defensible. More concerning is the military's interest in weaponizing these traits for battlefield applications." The video returned to Sarah's face, her expression resolute. "I'm removing Subject 7 from the facility today. If anything happens to me, this footage serves as evidence that the research has crossed ethical boundaries and should be permanently discontinued." The video ended, leaving a heavy silence in the dilapidated room. Thunderheart, as if sensing the significance of the moment, let out a soft, rumbling sound. "She knew," Jessica said quietly, tears threatening. "Mom knew exactly what she was doing when she took him." "Sarah always did," Mike agreed, his voice rough with emotion. "And she paid for it. Her career, her reputation, all sacrificed because she wouldn't compromise her principles." Dr. Reeves nodded weakly. "Vernon made sure she was discredited professionally, called her emotional, unstable. The military backed him because they wanted the research to continue elsewhere without the ethical complications she raised. And now they want Thunderheart to clean up the last loose end," Dylan concluded grimly. "Not just that," Dr. Reeves corrected. "They want tissue samples. Brain tissue, specifically. Thunderheart's unusual cognitive abilities have persisted far longer than anyone predicted. They want to understand why, to improve the new program." "New program?" Jessica asked sharply. Dr. Reeves nodded, fatigue evident in every movement. Different species, same concept, military companion animals with enhanced recognition and memory. Vernon's land deal is just his personal profit from facilitating the research restart. Earl, who had been listening silently, finally spoke. So, what's the play here? That video is 20 years old. Half those military folks are probably retired or dead. But the paper trail isn't, Dr. Reeves countered. I've kept records of everything: funding authorizations, research protocols, the falsified reports after Sarah left, enough to embarrass a lot of powerful people if it went public. Blackmail? Dylan asked, looking uncomfortable. Leverage, Dr. Reeves corrected. A dead man's switch. If anything happens to Thunderheart or any of you, everything gets released to media outlets nationwide. Mike shook his head slowly. It won't work, Eleanor. Vernon's backed by people who can make evidence disappear. Witnesses, too. We need something more immediate. Before anyone could respond, the tablet chimed with an incoming call. Rebecca's name flashed on the screen. Dylan answered quickly, putting it on speaker. Dylan? Rebecca's voice was tense, urgent. Are you with Mike and Jessica? We're all here, Dylan confirmed. What's wrong? Vernon's gotten the quarantine order suspended, she reported, background noise suggesting she was in a moving vehicle. He's claiming national security overrides state veterinary authority. They're mobilizing to search the old research facility. Mike's blood ran cold. How? That location isn't on any of the current search grids. It wasn't, Rebecca confirmed grimly, until an anonymous tip came in an hour ago. Someone told them exactly where to look. All eyes turned to Dr. Reeves, whose expression remained impassive despite her deteriorating condition. Eleanor? Mike asked quietly. Something you want to tell us? I'm dying, Mike, she replied simply. Cancer's spread to my brain. The hallucinations started yesterday. I can't trust my own mind anymore. She met his gaze directly. I made a call while you were all sleeping. I thought I was calling my nurse. Apparently, I reached someone else entirely. The betrayal hit like a physical blow. Jessica moved away from the older woman, positioning herself protectively near Thunderheart. How could you? I don't think she knew what she was doing, Mike said quietly, studying Dr. Reeves with a mixture of pity and resignation. Brain mets can cause confusion, personality changes. Doesn't change our situation, Earl pointed out practically. How long do we have? Rebecca's voice came through the speaker again. 20 minutes, maybe less. They're mobilizing everything they have. Mike stood, decision made. Dylan, get Dr. Reeves to a hospital. Her condition is genuine, whatever else has happened. Jessica, start downloading everything from that flash drive to multiple devices. Earl, you and I need to move Thunderheart. Move him where? Earl asked. They've got the whole preserve locked down tighter than a drum. Mike smiled grimly. Not the whole preserve. There's one place Vernon would never think to search because he considers it beneath his notice. Understanding dawned on Earl's weathered face. The maintenance shed at Cottonwood Creek. Vernon thinks it's been condemned for years, because that's what I told him, Mike confirmed. In reality, I've been using it as a storage facility for the past decade. It's not on any current preserve maps. It's still on preserve land, Jessica pointed out. If they sweep thoroughly enough, they won't, Mike cut her off. Vernon's focused on the research facility now. He'll commit everything to searching here. We just need enough time to get Thunderheart somewhere safe until Rebecca's board meeting tomorrow. Dylan ended the call with Rebecca, promising to update her on their plan. What about after the board meeting? He asked. Even if Rebecca exposes everything, there's no guarantee they'll protect Thunderheart. One problem at a time, son, Mike replied, the old ranger's pragmatism surfacing through the crisis. Right now, we just need to survive the night. As they hurriedly gathered their essential supplies, Dr. Reeves watched from her chair, her expression a complex mixture of regret and resignation. "I never meant to betray you, Mike," she said softly. "Sarah was my friend, too." Mike paused in his preparations, meeting her gaze directly. "I know, Eleanor. That's why you're going to a hospital instead of being left here for Vernon to find." The statement, delivered without malice but with firm finality, hung in the air between them, a reminder that even in his compassion Mike Thompson was not a man to cross lightly. Outside, the distant sound of helicopters broke the morning stillness, growing louder with each passing second. Time had run out. The emergency board meeting of the Oak Ridge Wildlife Preserve convened in the modern glass-fronted administration building, morning sunlight streaming through the windows to illuminate the 12 somber-faced members seated around the polished oak table. Rebecca Wilson stood at the head of the room, her professional demeanor firmly in place despite the sleepless night evident in the shadows beneath her eyes. Behind her, a screen displayed satellite imagery of the preserve, various sectors highlighted in different colors. "Thank you all for coming on such short notice," she began, her voice steady. "As acting director in my father's absence, I've called this meeting to address serious concerns about recent activities on preserve property." "Where exactly is Director Wilson?" asked Martin Chambers, the board's eldest member and longest-serving trustee. His patrician features were set in a frown of disapproval. "Currently leading a specialized search operation," Rebecca replied carefully. "The nature of this operation is part of what we need to discuss today." She tapped her tablet, changing the display to show footage of the python attack and Mike's intervention. The board members watched in silence as the scene unfolded. The massive snake constricting the bull, Mike's desperate rescue attempt, the bull's surprising recognition of its former owner. 3 days ago, Senior Ranger Michael Thompson violated preserve protocols by interfering with a predator-prey interaction, Rebecca stated, her professional tone belying the emotion behind her words. He was subsequently terminated by Director Wilson, just 48 hours before his scheduled retirement after 45 years of service. Murmurs spread around the table, several board members exchanging concerned glances. "That seems unusually harsh," noted Dr. Harriet Liang, the conservation biologist who represented the scientific community on the board, especially given Thompson's long service record. "It would be," Rebecca agreed, "if this were simply about protocol violation. But there's more to this situation than appears in the official record." She changed the display again, bringing up land surveys of the Northern Preserve section. "This is what's really at stake." Over the next 30 minutes, Rebecca methodically presented the evidence she and Dylan had compiled. Vernon's secret negotiations with developers, the classified history of the research facility, the real reason for his obsessive pursuit of Thunderheart. She carefully omitted any details about the bull's current location, focusing instead on the ethical and legal violations in Vernon's actions. "So, to summarize," she concluded, Director Wilson has misused preserve resources, deployed unauthorized personnel on preserve land, and terminated a senior employee to facilitate a private land development deal worth approximately $50 million, of which he stands to receive a 12% finder's fee. Silence hung heavy in the room as the board members absorbed the implications. Martin Chambers was the first to speak, his voice heavy with disappointment. "These are serious allegations, Ms. Wilson, particularly coming from a director's daughter against her own father." "I'm aware of how this appears," Rebecca acknowledged, "which is why every statement I've made is supported by documentation in the files I've provided to each of you." "And where is Michael Thompson now?" asked Sonia Redbird, the indigenous representative who had consistently supported conservation over development. "Is he safe?" Rebecca chose her words carefully. "Mr. Thompson is currently in a secure location. His primary concern remains the welfare of the bull, which he believes is being targeted for elimination to remove evidence of the previous research program. Dr. Liang leaned forward, scientific curiosity piqued. This research program, enhanced bovine cognition, is it scientifically credible? The idea seems far-fetched. I thought so too, Rebecca admitted, until I saw the bull's behavior myself. She played the clip of Thunderheart resting his head against Mike's chest in clear recognition. This animal recognized a man he hadn't seen in 5 years. That goes well beyond normal bovine cognitive capacity. The boardroom door opened suddenly, and Vernon Wilson strode in, flanked by 2 of the uniformed men who had become fixtures at the preserve over the past 3 days. Despite his disheveled appearance, Vernon carried himself with military bearing, his expression coldly furious as he surveyed the scene. "What is the meaning of this, Rebecca?" he demanded, ignoring protocol and the startled expressions of the board members. Rebecca straightened, refusing to be intimidated. "Emergency board meeting, Director Wilson. I've been briefing the trustees on recent events." Vernon's gaze flicked to the screen, comprehension and rage dawning simultaneously. "You have no authority to disclose classified information to unauthorized personnel. As acting director in your absence, I have every authority to inform the board of activities taking place on preserved land," Rebecca countered, "including the misappropriation of resources for personal financial gain." "This meeting is adjourned," Vernon announced, turning to address the board. "What you've heard today is a grossly distorted account from an emotionally compromised source. A full explanation will be provided once ongoing security operations are complete." Martin Chambers rose to his feet, his dignity undiminished by his advanced age. "With respect, Director Wilson, this meeting was properly convened according to bylaws, and we will determine when it adjourns." He gestured to the uniformed men. "I must also question the presence of non-preserved personnel in a closed board session." Vernon's jaw tightened, but he maintained his composure. "These gentlemen are federal consultants assisting with a sensitive wildlife management situation. They're military personnel searching for a 22-year-old bull that was part of a classified research program conducted on preserved land without proper oversight or authorization," Rebecca corrected bluntly. "A program you're attempting to resurrect for financial gain." Murmurs of concern spread around the table. Vernon's expression hardened as he realized the extent of Rebecca's disclosure. "You've just compromised national security, Rebecca," he said quietly. "There will be consequences." "The only thing I've compromised is your retirement plan," she replied, standing her ground. "The board deserves to know why preserve resources are being used for a private manhunt." "Bull hunt," corrected Dr. Liang, with the hint of a smile, breaking the tension momentarily. Vernon ignored the interruption, his focus entirely on Rebecca. "Where is Thompson? Where's the bull?" "I don't know," Rebecca answered truthfully. "And even if I did, I wouldn't tell you." Vernon studied his daughter with cold calculation before turning back to the board. "Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for this family drama. The simple truth is that Michael Thompson stole valuable research property, assaulted preserve personnel, and is currently a fugitive. My daughter, unfortunately, has allowed her personal feelings for Thompson's assistant, Mr. Barrett, to cloud her professional judgment." Rebecca flushed with anger. "This has nothing to do with Dylan and everything to do with your corruption." "Enough!" Martin Chambers intervened, his authoritative voice cutting through the tension. "Director Wilson, these are serious allegations supported by substantial documentation. The board will require time to review these materials and reach a determination." "There isn't time," Vernon insisted. "That bull contains valuable research data that could be lost if—" "If what?" Sonia Redbird interrupted sharply. "If it isn't euthanized and dissected quickly enough. That's what this is about, isn't it? Killing an animal to cover up past misdeeds." Vernon's expression revealed nothing, but his silence was damning. Before he could formulate a response, his phone buzzed. Checking it, a triumphant smile spread across his face. "It appears this discussion is moot," he announced. "I've just received confirmation that we've located Thompson and the bull. Recovery is underway as we speak." Rebecca's blood ran cold. "What have you done?" "My job," Vernon replied simply, pocketing his phone. "The board can review whatever documentation you've provided at their leisure. By then, this matter will be resolved." As Vernon turned to leave, Martin Chambers spoke again, his tone carrying the weight of authority that came from decades of leadership. "Director Wilson, this board has not dismissed you from this meeting, nor authorized any recovery operation on preserved land." His stern gaze swept the room. "I move for an immediate vote of no confidence and temporary suspension of Director Wilson pending full investigation of these allegations." "I second," Sonia Redbird said immediately. Vernon froze, disbelief evident in his expression. "You can't be serious. Based on a few documents that could easily have been falsified?" "Based on your behavior right now," Martin corrected. "A responsible director would welcome transparency and investigation, not attempt to shut down board oversight." He looked around the table. "All in favor?" Hands rose around the table. First Dr. Liang's, then others, until 9 of the 12 board members had voted in support of the motion. Martin nodded gravely. "Director Wilson, you are hereby suspended from all duties pending full investigation. Please surrender your preserved credentials to security." Vernon's face flushed with barely controlled rage. "You have no idea what you're interfering with," he warned. "This goes beyond a local preserve dispute." "Then I suggest you cooperate fully with the investigation to ensure all perspectives are properly represented," Martin replied implacably. "Ms. Wilson, as Deputy Director, you will assume temporary leadership until this matter is resolved." Vernon turned to Rebecca, his voice low enough that only she could hear. "You think you've won?" "My team already has Thompson's location. By the time this meeting ends, everything will be handled." Rebecca maintained her composure, though fear clutched at her heart. "This isn't about winning, Dad. It's about doing what's right." "Right doesn't matter," Vernon hissed. "Results matter. Power matters. That's something your mother never understood either." He turned and strode from the room, the uniformed men following closely. As the door closed behind them, Rebecca fought to keep her professional demeanor intact despite the terror gripping her. Somewhere on the preserve, Mike, Jessica, and Thunderheart were in immediate danger, and she had no way to warn them. Miles away, in the dilapidated maintenance shed at Cottonwood Creek, Mike Thompson sat with his back against the rough wooden wall, rifle balanced across his knees. Through the shed's single grimy window, he could see the first pink traces of dawn illuminating the eastern sky. Beside him, Jessica dozed fitfully on a makeshift bed of old feed sacks, exhaustion having finally overcome her determination to remain vigilant. In the center of the small space, Thunderheart stood quietly, occasionally shifting his weight from one leg to another. The bull's presence filled the shed, his massive form somehow conveying patience and trust despite the stress of constant movement and confinement. Mike checked his watch. 6:17 a.m. Rebecca's board meeting would be starting now. Everything hinged on her ability to convince the trustees of Vernon's corruption before his search teams discovered their location. Earl had left hours ago to create false trails leading away from the maintenance shed, a risky but necessary diversion. A soft buzzing sound broke the silence. Mike reached carefully into his pocket, extracting the prepaid phone Dylan had provided, untraceable and used only for emergency communication. A text message glowed on the screen. V suspended. Board voted 9-3. But he says they found you. Where are you? Mike's heart sank. If Vernon claimed to have found them, it meant someone had talked or been forced to talk. Dr. Reeves, perhaps, her deteriorating condition making her vulnerable to manipulation. Or maybe Earl had been intercepted while laying false trails. "Jess," he called softly, hating to wake his exhausted daughter but seeing no alternative. "We need to move. Now." Jessica came awake instantly, years of emergency veterinary calls having trained her to transition from sleep to alertness in seconds. "What's happened?" "Vernon's been suspended by the board, but he claims he's found us," Mike explained, already gathering their meager supplies. "We can't risk staying." "Where can we go?" Jessica asked, moving to Thunderheart's side to check his condition. "The entire preserve is crawling with search teams." Mike considered their dwindling options. "Off the preserve entirely. There's an old fire road about 2 miles east that leads to State Highway 16. If we can get Thunderheart there, Earl can meet us with his trailer." 2 miles through open terrain, Jessica noted grimly. "In daylight, with search teams and probably helicopters looking for us." "Got a better idea?" Mike asked, not unkindly. Jessica shook her head, already texting Earl their new plan. As she worked, a notification appeared on her phone, an email from Dylan with an attachment. She opened it quickly, scanning the contents. "Dad," she said, her voice tight with controlled urgency. Dylan sent Sarah's original research data, the complete files. And a message. "Vernon, tracking your phone. Military team closing on maintenance shed from north and west. GPS shows them less than a mile out." Mike's expression hardened. "They've known where we are all along." "They've been toying with us, waiting for the board meeting to conclude." "Or waiting for Rebecca to be discredited before moving in," Jessica suggested, hurriedly downloading the files Dylan had sent before powering off her phone completely. "Either way, we're out of time." Outside, the distant sound of vehicles approaching from multiple directions confirmed their worst fears. Mike moved to the shed door, peering cautiously through a crack between the weathered boards. "2 trucks coming from the north," he reported grimly, "and I can hear engines to the west. They're coordinating to surround us." Jessica joined her father at the door, assessing their options with the clarity of desperation. "The creek bed," she suggested. "It's dry this time of year, runs east toward the old fire road. If we move through it, the banks might provide cover." Mike nodded approvingly. "Sarah always said you had the best strategic mind in the family." He turned to Thunderheart, who watched them with those impossibly intelligent eyes. "Question is, can we get a 1,500-pound bull to move quietly through a creek bed?" As if in answer, Thunderheart lowered his massive head, a gesture Mike recognized from years past, the bull's way of indicating willingness to follow. The simple action, so full of trust and understanding, momentarily stole Mike's voice. "He knows," Jessica whispered, scientific skepticism finally giving way to acceptance of what her eyes told her. "He understands we're trying to help him." Mike nodded, swallowing the emotion that threatened to overwhelm him. "Your mother always insisted he was special." "I never fully believed her until now." They moved quickly, gathering only the most essential supplies. Mike checked his rifle. 6 rounds remaining, barely enough to provide covering fire if needed. His injured arm throbbed with renewed intensity, the stress and constant movement having aggravated the healing wound. "Ready?" he asked Jessica, who had slung a small backpack over her shoulders. She nodded, her expression resolute, despite the fear evident in her eyes. "As I'll ever be." Mike led the way, easing the shed door open and scanning for immediate threats, before signaling Jessica to follow with Thunderheart. The bull moved with surprising quietness for his size, each hoof placement deliberate as they crept toward the dried creek bed 50 yards away. They had covered half the distance when the first shout came from behind them. "There! By the shed!" Mike turned to see a uniformed figure pointing in their direction, already reaching for his radio. Without hesitation, Mike fired a single shot into the air, not to injure, but to create confusion and buy precious seconds. "Run!" he urged Jessica, who needed no further encouragement. They abandoned stealth for speed, Jessica leading Thunderheart directly toward the creek bed as Mike provided covering fire, forcing their pursuers to take cover momentarily. The crack of return fire split the morning air, bullets kicking up dirt near Mike's feet as he backed toward the creek. Jessica reached the relative safety of the creek bed first, helping Thunderheart navigate the short drop to the dry stream bed. The bull moved with remarkable agility for his age and size, seeming to understand the urgency of their situation. Mike joined them seconds later, sliding down the eroded bank as bullets struck the ground where he had stood moments before. "Go east," he directed, gesturing downstream. "Stay low and keep moving." They hurried along the creek bed, the steep banks providing partial cover from their pursuers. Behind them, shouts and the sounds of vehicles converging indicated the full scale of Vernon's operation. This was no simple search team, but a coordinated military-style maneuver. "He must have been planning this for months," Jessica gasped as they ran, keeping close to Thunderheart's side. "The personnel, the equipment, this isn't something arranged overnight." "Vernon's been waiting 20 years for this opportunity," Mike replied grimly. "Ever since Sarah exposed the research program and forced its shutdown." They continued eastward, the creek bed gradually deepening as they moved toward the old fire road. The sounds of pursuit remained constant behind them, but the natural terrain features provided enough cover to maintain their narrow lead. After nearly a mile, Jessica's phone, despite being powered off, suddenly emitted a loud, piercing tone. She pulled it from her pocket in confusion and horror. "Remote activation," Mike realized immediately. "They're using it to track us." "Dump it! Now!" Jessica hesitated only briefly before hurling the phone into a dense patch of brush away from their path. The device continued its electronic shriek, hopefully providing a false trail for their pursuers. They pressed on, Thunderheart showing remarkable endurance despite his age. The bull moved steadily alongside them, occasionally glancing at Mike as if seeking reassurance that they were still on the right path. As they approached a bend in the creek bed, Mike signaled for them to halt, listening intently. The sounds of pursuit had changed, spread out rather than concentrated directly behind them. He peered carefully over the creek bank, then ducked back down quickly. "They've split up," he reported tensely. "Teams moving parallel to the creek on both sides. They're trying to flank us." "The fire road can't be more than half a mile ahead," Jessica said, checking her watch. "If Earl got my message, he should be waiting there with the trailer." "If," Mike emphasized. "Big if." He made a quick decision. "I'll create a diversion. Draw them north while you take Thunderheart straight east to the road." Jessica shook her head emphatically. "No, we're not splitting up." "Jess," Mike said gently, "this isn't about me anymore. It's about keeping Thunderheart safe, protecting what your mother died trying to save." "Mom didn't die trying to save Thunderheart," Jessica corrected, a flash of anger breaking through her fear. "She died of cancer. And I'm not losing you to Vernon's vendetta. We stay together." Before Mike could argue further, Thunderheart suddenly raised his head, nostrils flaring as he detected something in the air. The bull turned his massive head eastward, then back to Mike, making a soft, lowing sound. "He smells something," Jessica whispered. A new sound reached them, the distinctive rumble of Earl's ancient diesel truck somewhere ahead. Hope surged through Mike. "Earl made it. The fire road must be just beyond that next bend." They moved forward cautiously, aware that their salvation might also be a trap. As they rounded the bend, the creek bed widened and shallowed, eventually merging with a culvert that ran under the old fire road. Through the concrete tunnel, they could see Earl's truck and livestock trailer parked on the far side. "There's our ride," Mike said, relief evident in his voice. "Let's—" The words died in his throat as a helicopter thundered overhead, rotors kicking up a blinding cloud of dust. From both sides of the creek bed, uniformed figures appeared, weapons raised. "Freeze! Hands where we can see them!" Mike raised his hands slowly, letting his rifle hang from its strap. Jessica did the same, moving closer to Thunderheart, as if her body could somehow shield the massive animal. Through the settling dust, a familiar figure approached. Vernon Wilson, a triumphant smile playing at the corners of his mouth despite his disheveled appearance. "End of the line, Thompson," he called, stopping a safe distance away. "You've led us on quite a chase." "It's over, Vernon," Mike replied steadily. "The board suspended you. They know everything. The research program, the development deals, all of it." Vernon's smile didn't falter. "Temporary setback. Once we've secured the research subject and processed the data, the narrative will change. National security concerns will override local preserve politics." "He's not a research subject," Jessica protested. "He's a living being who deserves protection." "He's government property," Vernon corrected coldly. "Valuable property that your mother stole 20 years ago." "She rescued him," Mike countered. "From people like you who saw him as nothing but data points and tissue samples." Vernon signaled to his men, who began to approach cautiously, tranquilizer guns trained on Thunderheart. "Your sentimentality is exactly why conservation requires professional management, Thompson. Emotional attachments cloud objective resource allocation." As the men drew closer, Thunderheart shifted uneasily, moving to position himself between the approaching threat and Mike. The gesture, so clearly protective, caused even the armed men to hesitate. "You see?" Jessica said, her voice carrying in the tense silence. "He understands. He's protecting someone he recognizes as family. How can you look at that and still claim he's just property?" Vernon's expression hardened. Anthropomorphizing animal behavior is precisely the kind of unscientific sentimentality that has no place in modern conservation. "That bull is responding to instinctive territorial patterns, nothing more." "You're wrong," came a new voice from behind Vernon. All eyes turned to see Eleanor Reeves being helped from Earl's truck by Dylan Barrett. The elderly scientist looked frail, supported by an IV pole Dylan carried, but her eyes burned with the fire of purpose. "Dr. Reeves," Vernon acknowledged coldly. "I was informed you were hospitalized." "I was," she confirmed, her voice weak but determined, "until I learned you were closing in on Thompson and Thunderheart. Some things are worth leaving one's deathbed for." She gestured to Dylan, who produced a tablet. "I've brought the complete research data, Vernon. Not the sanitized version you've been using, but the raw data, including Sarah Thompson's final observations before she shut down the program." Vernon's facade of control slipped momentarily. "That data is classified." "It was," Dr. Reeves agreed. "Until I declassified it this morning, using the authorization codes I've maintained as the original project lead." She nodded to Dylan, who tapped the tablet screen. "Copies have been sent to the board, major media outlets, and scientific journals," Dylan confirmed. "The complete history of Project Sentinel is now public record." Vernon's expression darkened with fury. "You've just committed treason, Doctor." "No," Dr. Reeves countered calmly. "I've corrected a 20-year injustice. Sarah Thompson wasn't a thief or a saboteur. She was a whistleblower exposing unethical research practices, research you're attempting to resurrect for personal financial gain." Vernon turned to his men. "Secure the bull, now." The uniformed figures hesitated, looking between Vernon and the new arrivals with evident uncertainty. The public exposure of the project had clearly not been part of their briefing. In that moment of hesitation, Thunderheart made his move. The massive bull charged forward, not toward Vernon or his men, but toward the culvert leading to Earl's trailer. With surprising speed for his size and age, he bolted through the concrete tunnel and up the ramp that Earl had already lowered in anticipation. "Stop him!" Vernon shouted, but his authority was crumbling visibly as his men registered the changing situation. Mike and Jessica seized the opportunity, sprinting after Thunderheart toward the waiting trailer. Dylan moved to intercept Vernon as he reached for his sidearm, knocking the older man off balance with a well-placed shoulder. "That's enough," Dylan said firmly, standing over Vernon. "It's over." As Mike and Jessica reached the trailer, Earl was already securing the gate behind Thunderheart, his weathered hands moving with practiced efficiency despite the chaos around them. "Perfect timing, old friend," Mike gasped, clutching his injured arm, which had begun bleeding again through the bandage. Earl nodded, a slight smile creasing his leathery face. "Figured you could use a ride." The confrontation behind them dissolved into confusion as more vehicles arrived, preserve rangers responding to Rebecca's orders, local sheriff's deputies, and even news vans alerted by the board's emergency announcement. Vernon Wilson stood alone in the creek bed, watching as his carefully constructed plans collapsed around him. The uniformed men, reading the shifting winds of fortune, had already begun distancing themselves, weapons lowered, some even removing identifying insignia. As the trailer door closed securely behind Thunderheart, Mike Thompson felt 20 years of broken promises finally begin to heal. Sarah had been right all along. Some bonds transcended simple biology, some promises mattered more than rules, and some fights were worth any cost. In the trailer, Thunderheart stood calmly, his intelligent eyes fixed on Mike through the slats. The heart-shaped mark on his forehead seemed to glow in the morning light, a living symbol of Sarah's legacy and the power of a promise kept at last. Golden morning light spilled across the rolling pastures of the newly established Thunderheart Wildlife Sanctuary, illuminating dew-kissed grass and the weathered sign that marked the entrance. 6 months had passed since the confrontation at Cottonwood Creek. 6 months of testimony, legal battles, and fundamental changes to the Oak Ridge Wildlife Preserve and the surrounding community. Mike Thompson sat on the front porch of the small cabin that now served as his home, a steaming mug of coffee warming his hands against the early autumn chill. At 66, his body carried the familiar aches of a life spent outdoors, his injured arm still occasionally stiff when rain threatened. But his eyes were clear and peaceful as he surveyed the sanctuary that had risen from the ashes of controversy. The sound of tires on gravel announced Jessica's arrival. She emerged from her Jeep carrying a bag of groceries and what appeared to be medical supplies, her movements confident and purposeful. And the past months had transformed her as well. Gone was the reluctant small-town veterinarian. In her place stood a woman who had found her true calling, combining her scientific training with the compassion she'd inherited from both parents. "Morning, Dad," she called, climbing the porch steps with practiced ease. "Brought your prescriptions and enough food to last the week. How's the arm today?" "Same as yesterday," Mike replied with a slight smile. "Complaining, but functional, like its owner." Jessica set her supplies down and settled into the chair beside him, accepting the mug of coffee he poured from the thermos at his feet. Together, they watched the sun continue its ascent over their shared creation. The sanctuary occupied 50 acres of what had once been Earl Jennings' ranch, purchased with Jessica's savings and supplemented by community donations that had poured in after the full story became public. What had begun as a safe haven for one special bull had expanded to include rescue animals from throughout the region, retired livestock, injured wildlife rehabilitating before release, and a few permanent residents whose stories had particularly touched the public's heart. "Rebecca called last night," Jessica said after a comfortable silence. "The board's finalized the new preserve management plan. They're naming the northern section after Mom, the Sarah Thompson Memorial Conservation Area." Mike nodded, emotion momentarily tightening his throat. She would have liked that, though she never much cared for having her name on things. True, Jessica agreed with a soft laugh. She cared more about the work than the recognition. She hesitated, then added, Rebecca also mentioned that Vernon's sentencing is scheduled for next week. Mike's expression remained neutral. Vernon Wilson's fall had been swift and complete after the exposure of his corruption. Facing charges ranging from misappropriation of federal funds to endangering protected wildlife, he had eventually accepted a plea deal that would send him to a minimum security facility for 3 years, a lenient sentence that reflected his age and prior public service, if not the true scope of his betrayal. "You planning to attend?" Mike asked, noting the conflict in his daughter's eyes. Jessica shook her head. "No. Rebecca's going. Feels she needs to for closure. But I've said all I need to say to Vernon Wilson." She smiled suddenly, the tension leaving her face. "Besides, we've got the sanctuary's official opening ceremony that day. I'd rather celebrate beginnings than witness endings." The sanctuary's grand opening had evolved from a small local event into something approaching a regional celebration. Media coverage of Thunderheart's story had captured public imagination, drawing attention to issues of animal cognition, ethical treatment, and the complex relationships between humans and the creatures in their care. "Dylan called," Mike mentioned casually. "Said he'd be by later to help set up the viewing platform for the ceremony." Jessica's cheeks colored slightly at the mention of Dylan Barrett, whose transformation from Vernon's ambitious protege to principled whistleblower had surprised everyone, perhaps even Dylan himself. In the months since, he had become a regular presence at the sanctuary, his ranger experience proving invaluable as they established proper habitats for their growing population of residents. "He's bringing Rebecca, too," Jessica added, her tone deliberately casual. "They've been working on the educational materials for the new preserve programs." Mike hid a smile behind his coffee mug. The tentative romance blossoming between his daughter and the young ranger hadn't escaped his notice, though both parties seemed determined to pretend it was purely professional collaboration. Sarah would have found it endlessly amusing, and then probably interfered shamelessly to move things along. The thought of Sarah brought Mike's gaze automatically to the far pasture, where a distinctive white heart-shaped mark could be seen among the tall grass. Thunderheart had thrived in the months since his rescue, his already remarkable longevity seemingly extended by the peace and purpose he'd found as the sanctuary's unofficial mascot. "Still hard to believe," Jessica said, following her father's gaze. 22 years old, and healthier than Bull's half his age." "Your mother always said he was special," Mike replied, the words no longer carrying the skepticism they once had. "Guess she was right about that, like most things." Jessica nodded, her scientific mind still occasionally struggling with what her eyes confirmed daily. Thunderheart's intelligence and recognition abilities defied conventional understanding. Dr. Reeves had helped explain some of it before her passing 3 months ago, her final days spent documenting the bull's remarkable cognitive functions for legitimate scientific journals. "The research community's still debating," Jessica noted, her tone mixing professional interest with protective caution. "Some want to conduct new studies, non-invasive ones." "And what do you tell them?" Mike asked, though he already knew the answer. "That Thunderheart has contributed enough to science," she replied firmly. "His remaining years are his own." The sound of heavy hoofbeats drew their attention. Thunderheart himself appeared at the fence line nearest the cabin, his massive head raised as if he knew he was the subject of their conversation. Despite his age, the bull carried himself with dignity, his dark eyes still alert and aware as they fixed on the porch where Mike and Jessica sat. Mike raised his coffee mug in silent acknowledgement. After a moment, Thunderheart lowered his head in what could only be described as a deliberate nod before turning to amble back toward the shade of a sprawling oak tree, his favorite resting spot during the heat of the day. I still can't get used to that, Jessica admitted, shaking her head in wonder. It's like he understands exactly what we're saying. Maybe he does, Mike suggested. Or maybe he just understands what matters. That he's home, that he's safe, that he's loved, Jessica added softly. Mike nodded, unable to dispute the simple truth of it. Whatever scientific explanations might eventually account for Thunderheart's abilities, they couldn't diminish the profound bond that had formed between the bull and the Thompson family. A bond that had ultimately saved all of them in different ways. The sanctuary had given Mike purpose beyond retirement, Jessica fulfillment beyond her medical practice, and the local community a cause that transcended political divisions. What had begun as a desperate rescue had evolved into something approaching a movement, with educational programs now being developed to teach children about animal cognition and ethical treatment. Earl's bringing his grandkids by later, Mike mentioned, changing the subject to more practical matters. Thought they might help with setting up chairs for the ceremony? Jessica smiled, knowing how much Mike enjoyed Earl's grandchildren, perhaps seeing in them the grandchildren Sarah had always hoped for, but never lived to see. They'll love that. Especially if you let them help feed Thunderheart again. They're good kids, Mike acknowledged, respectful, gentle with the animals. A comfortable silence fell between father and daughter as they watched the sanctuary coming alive with morning activity, birds swooping between trees, rescued farm animals emerging from their shelters, the occasional distant movement of wild creatures along the preserve boundary that bordered their land. "Do you ever regret it?" Jessica asked suddenly. "Breaking all those rules? Risking everything?" Mike considered the question, his weathered face thoughtful. "Not for a second," he finally answered. "Some promises matter more than rules, Jess. Your mother understood that. Took me longer to figure it out." Jessica nodded, understanding flowing between them without need for further explanation. Her own journey had paralleled her father's in many ways, from rigid adherence to scientific protocols to recognition of the deeper truths that sometimes transcended conventional wisdom. "I've been thinking about Mom's research," she said after another pause. "Not the military applications, but her original work on cognitive enhancement through environmental enrichment and proper nutrition. There might be something there that could help older livestock generally, improve their quality of life in their final years." Mike smiled, recognizing Sarah's influence in Jessica's thinking. "She'd like that, using what we've learned to help others, not exploit them." "It wouldn't be anything flashy," Jessica cautioned. "Just practical applications that might make a difference for animals that are usually discarded once they're past their productive years. The ones nobody thinks are worth saving anymore," Mike added, understanding completely. Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of another vehicle, Earl's ancient pickup truck, now sporting a fresh coat of paint with Thunderheart Wildlife Sanctuary emblazoned on the doors. The old rancher had become the sanctuary's most dedicated volunteer, bringing decades of livestock experience and a seemingly inexhaustible work ethic despite his 70-plus years. "Morning, Thompsons," Earl called as he climbed out, immediately followed by two excited children who barely waited for the truck to stop before racing toward the fence where Thunderheart could be seen watching their arrival. "Remember the rules," Earl called after them. "No running near the animals, and wait for Miss Jessica before you go into any enclosures." Jessica laughed, rising to greet them. "I'd better go supervise before they try to teach Thunderheart new tricks again." She squeezed her father's shoulder gently before heading down the porch steps. Left alone, Mike watched as his daughter moved confidently among the sanctuary grounds, her interaction with Earl's grandchildren revealing the natural teaching ability she'd inherited from Sarah. The sight filled him with quiet pride tinged with bittersweet awareness of how much Sarah would have loved to witness this, their daughter finding her true calling, their family legacy continuing in ways neither of them could have predicted. His gaze drifted back to Thunderheart, now accepting gentle pats from the children under Jessica's watchful supervision. The bull's patience with the young visitors had become legendary in the community, his gentle demeanor with children contrasting sharply with the powerful presence he projected when necessary, such as when a coyote had ventured too close to the smaller rescue animals last month. Mike's phone buzzed with an incoming text, Dylan confirming his arrival time and asking if they needed any additional supplies for the viewing platform. The young ranger had proven himself repeatedly in the months since the confrontation, his testimony helping to secure Vernon's conviction while his practical skills contributed enormously to the sanctuary's development. As Mike typed a reply, he noticed the date displayed on his phone's screen, October 15th, Sarah's birthday. The realization sent a wave of emotion through him, not the sharp grief of earlier years, but something softer, warmer. She had been gone 5 years now, but her presence remained in everything around him, in Jessica's compassionate determination, in Thunderheart's impossible existence, in the sanctuary that embodied her core beliefs about the relationship between humans and animals. "Happy birthday, old girl," he murmured, gazing across the sanctuary that would never have existed without her courage 2 decades ago. "Wish you could see what your bulls accomplished." As if hearing him, Thunderheart raised his massive head, looking directly toward the porch where Mike sat alone. The bull's ears flicked forward in that distinctive way that had always signaled recognition, his dark eyes seemingly holding wisdom accumulated across 22 remarkable years. For just a moment, Mike could almost imagine Sarah standing beside the bull, her hand resting on that distinctive heart-shaped mark, her smile filled with the satisfaction of promises kept and battles finally won. The image brought not pain, but peace, a recognition that some bonds truly did transcend time, separation, even death itself. The sanctuary bell rang, signaling feeding time for the rescue animals. Mike rose from his chair, setting aside empty reflections in favor of present purpose. There was work to be done, lives to care for, a legacy to build. Sarah would have expected nothing less. As he descended the porch steps to join the activity below, Mike Thompson felt the weight of 45 years as a ranger, 5 years as a widower, and 6 months as a sanctuary founder settle into a balanced perspective. The path forward wasn't perfect or certain, but it was clear and purposeful, shaped by promises kept despite impossible odds. Behind him, Thunderheart's distinctive low rumble carried across the morning air, not quite a moo, not quite a bellow, but something uniquely his own, a sound that seemed to say, in its own way, that all was right with their shared world at last. Have you ever wondered if the promises we make truly matter in a world that seems to value efficiency over emotion, rules over relationships? Mike Thompson's journey reminds us that some commitments transcend time, like his promise to his late wife Sarah about an extraordinary bull named Thunderheart. After 45 years as a dedicated ranger, Mike risked everything just days before retirement to honor a decades-old promise. His reward wasn't financial security or professional recognition, but something far more valuable: purpose beyond retirement, reconnection with his daughter Jessica, and the creation of the Thunderheart Wildlife Sanctuary that now serves as his legacy. As we enter our golden years, Mike's story teaches us that it's never too late to stand for what matters, that family bonds can heal even after years of misunderstanding, and that finding purpose after our primary career ends may be our most meaningful chapter yet. What promise have you made that still deserves to be kept, no matter how much time has passed? Has retirement given you unexpected opportunities to create something meaningful that might become your own living legacy? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Your wisdom might be exactly what another reader needs to hear today.